Hello, everyone. Welcome. Welcome, welcome. As we're waiting for everyone to enter in, we'd we'd ask everybody to maybe mute their mic, um, so we could just hear one voice. But we'd like in the chat if you can answer this question that Abdul, and I'll let him share who he is while you're answering this. Our graphic recorder Abdul, if you could answer this. So my name is, you could state your name or your nickname if that's, maybe they call you something else at home. My people are, how I like to phrase that is, you know, who are the people that you see red if they get hurt? Where you stop maybe using all your faculties, right? Like the people you love so much that you're gonna, you just put, step in front of a bullet for. That those might be your people, might be your people, or it could be your ancestors, right? It's like, who do you want to bring into this space? It could be, okay, is it hard? Is there an echo with me? Is that better? Does everybody hear an echo?
I think you sound fine.
Okay. Sorry, Lindsay, maybe it's your computer. It might be you. No. And then the last question is, I will build this world from. So maybe I will build this world from, and that's where you could put any values that you are. So let me mute. Okay, so you could do that, and I'm sorry if there's an echo. I don't know what to do about it. Not that techie. So let's write that in if you all might do that. Thanks for the feedback. So my name is Monica Kirka, and I'm the director of Plus Peace. And I'll be grounding this conversation in kind of the why. But first, I want to pass it to Abdul to share who he is and what he'll be doing today.
Hello, everyone. Firstly, just to thank Monica for inviting me to join you guys. My aim or focus here today is to be a group memory. So there'll be many people talking and many bits of information will be coming in. I'll be trying my utmost to gather that on the virtual screen that you see on the side, if you've shared your screen up. This is graphic recording. I've tuned my ears in to be able to listen quite attentively. And so I'm actually quite happy to hear from the last talk that there was put focus on listening, because often we get taught how to send information, but how to receive information or how to use these two things in the sides of our ears is not always there. So I'm happy for COVID that it's giving us this chance, but also saddened by the fact that it's also twisting the world up. But for here and the now, thanks for the invite. I'll make some graphics on the side for you. Thanks, Monica.
Perfect, thank you. And he comes from us via South Africa, in the you're in the...
No, a South African, Cape Town born, and now residing in Denmark.
Denmark, there you go.
Yeah, thanks.
Welcome. So to get the full experience, folks, as you're probably just seeing his drawing, if you go to the top right, there's a view button, and you are going to see a side-by-side gallery. And if you click on that, you can see half the screen, our beautiful faces, and half the screen, the drawing. And then you have the option to make the drawing much smaller or much bigger. So if you are able to do that, please do a +1. If not, if you need some help, Xander, that's at the Plus Piece, he's your tech support. So you can message him and say, what the heck? Okay, so let's hop in. I really love what people are saying here. My name is Alex. My people are my friends and family. I will build this world from compassion. I will build this world from kindness. So feel free to write in the chat. Beautiful. Okay. So as we write that, I want to just dig in. Is Jody with us yet? I don't know if I...
Yep.
I am.
Hey, what's up? All right.
Morning.
We're all here. The world is good now. Welcome. So we have a really amazing panel, and also I wouldn't call it a panel. What I'm going to call it is a fishbowl. So Abdul, you want to move it over? And so as a fishbowl, you're welcome to come for a swim, or you could just sit outside a little bit and watch. And so what we want to do is hold some space from some pretty I would say difficult conversations, but important conversations, and allow people that are, that have thought something about this and actually have stepped into the space of already living into the future, uh, to speak and to like listen. And then at the end, we'll have some time for questions, but we really want to have like a conversation. The last session was talking about a campfire. I think that's great too, if we think about a campfire, but I feel bad. I don't want to leave you guys out of the campfire. So I feel like a fishbowl might be more appropriate for this, where you're looking in. Um, uh, for now. And of course, you'll be invited in a bit. So what is this whole emergent, urgent? What are we talking about? So in July, I became I was brought into Plus Peace as the interim director. You could go to the Emergent Urgent, Abdul. And it was, it was interesting to me that a bunch of peace building organizations came together to say that like we need to organize collective action. Because, I don't know if a lot of fields have like existential crises, where like we need to do something that we don't do, or that we don't do that well, or that we haven't done for 20 years or 30 years. Because there was some there's some idea or some knowledge that we needed this. So with our team, Thor and Xander are on our team here, and Asil also, who's not present here, but we've been thinking about this idea of peace building. What it does great is really kind of looking into the emergent, right? So peace building, it's the slow process, the listening, facilitated process. Maybe it's on story, analysis. We do really good with divergent thinking, right? With like a lot of different nuance. We're okay with nuance, with complexity. Critical East, we borrow that from some guy named John Paul Lederach that's here with us. But he's talking about in movement spaces. We're talking about critical mass, right? Where we're looking at like the big movements. But he posits in The Moral Imagination by the book that you could if we focus as peace builders on the critical East and really take care of it and keep it warm and foster this kind of like safe space, that we have the ability to move it into the critical mass, or I would say bakery. And so these are metaphors. Another metaphor that I'm playing with, that we're playing with at Plus Peace, is the idea of a wadi. So if you've been to Egypt, or to, I'm originally from Romania, but I lived in California most of my life. And in the wadi, is a crazy place because it's like a desert. It's like nothing's there. And then the storm comes, and the rain comes, and suddenly this is like a field of flowers. And so something has cultivated the dry land, the brittle dry land, the flowers that came out. Some birds have planted seeds, some animals did not eat it. So I think of the wadi as oftentimes our context, right? Like places of conflict where we don't see a lot of life or a lot of things growing. But what we do see is that some birds come, some birds go. And so what if we are cultivating this wadi where we shoo away the birds that are going to eat the seeds, and we let the pollinators, or we let those birds that drop seeds, or the animals that poop and leave their seeds, I guess. I'm sorry, that's the truth of the matter. And so what are we cultivating to actually get us to get this flowering seed when this flood comes, which I would call like a movement space. So in the United States, we had, in March, we've had Black Lives Matter as something for, since 2014, 15, right? For even before that, but let's just say as a movement, after Michael Brown was killed by police in Ferguson, it really kind of emerged. And after how many years? 6 years, right? It really started taking on when George Floyd. So like one thing happened, and now suddenly there was mass reckoning. Now suddenly we're reckoning with race. I don't know if like most Black people in America would say we're like, now we're reckoning with race, but we've said that many times in this conference. So I'll say it too. There's a reckoning with race in America. So there's some kind of things that happen that if we're not ready, they're not going to be the flowering field. And so this conversation and the questions are really about how do we get that flowering field? So let's just dig in. So as our fishbowl, what we're going to do is have 2 or 3 of our panelists answer whatever question is relevant to them, whatever they want to answer, and then we'll go to the next question. So the first one I want to ask is, what has it been like to see peace builders and other change makers coming alive to the struggles and issues that many of you have been working on for a while? What has that been to observe people coming alive today of something that maybe has been something you've been working on, or a problem that has been observed for a while? Like, why is 2020 so special? Is it special?
I can start. Just jump right in, Monica.
Maybe
Yeah.
answer the question first, your name.
Yeah, my name, Carrie Kennedy. I'm Associate General Secretary for American Friends Service Committee. And I feel like
Wait, your people are?
Oh, my people.
And you will build this.
Oh, I have to answer those questions. My people are my family and global peace builders. And I build this world from a place of dignity, our shared humanity, and equality. So I really think that we've seen this since 2016. It's become more robust in 2020. I feel encouraged by the activism and engagement from people that have been disengaged. I think that's going to really be something that helps us to get past, reconcile our deeply divisive space right now, and also to get to, I think it will help us to start to be able to deal with our long history of systemic violence and racism and oppression. So, I'm encouraged when people like my mother, who was never political, is now showing up at rallies and posting Black Lives Matter on her lawn. Like, to me, that's a change that's so necessary when people who are not in this space are moved to act. And I think we need more of it. AFSC is a 103-year-old Quaker organization. So we've been in this fight for social justice in many ways for a century. And, often we're out there with signs and there's 10 of us. And so to see millions and thousands and new people and new energy, to me, it's going to take us to the next level in social justice.
Thank you for sharing that. I can go ahead and jump right in. Good morning, family. My name is Jody Geddes. My pronouns are she, her, they, them. My people are the Tainos and the Maroons of the West Indies. It's really good to be here with you all. And I currently live on Ohlone land in Oakland, California. For me, when I think about this question, the first thing that comes to mind is about time. I graduated from the Center for Justice and Peacebuilding at Eastern Mennonite University, kind of studying conflict transformation at the intersection of race and restorative justice. And I even think about, while the program was really incredible, I think peace building, what I saw was this lack of a lens around kind of systemic racialized violence and harm that I think it was less about folks knowing that it was present, but an ignoring of something that was in our front yards because folks were thinking about, how do I serve over there, without recognizing how the legacy and history of even this nation is connected to the kind of what we see as conflict over there, right? So even having an expansive view of what it means to build peace, and that when we build peace in one place, there is a ripple, right, that extends to other places and other nations, right? And so I think for me, I say in a loving way, I say about time, right? And then how do we, in the kind of academic spaces where we're teaching peace, because I think I see some of these or many of this happening. I have a 16-month-old, so it's breakfast time, which is why I was shuffling to get on the time. Would you like to be seen? It's okay, one moment. And so I think I'm asking the question also in the academic space, how do we talk about what is happening on the streets and in the community organization? You agree? Yeah. So I think saying about time and how do we kind of scale what I see often happening continuously in a community space, but not in spaces where people are being prepared to engage with communities in a real way and are not pushed to confront their privilege and power as even an entry point, right? Like that allows for the entry point for some of the work to happen. So I have a lot of thoughts, but the first thing that comes to mind is about time and how do I support to push that into spaces where it is still not visible and present, and there's a rejection of this kind of historical narrative and lens that we see now presenting itself because people are being asked to be still. Like that idea of urgency that I think often is a part of white supremacy culture that doesn't allow us to develop sustainable solutions to transform systems. Folks are now being asked to be still and question, what does it mean to be still as a peace builder? What does it mean to be still as an organizer? And that still involves, I think, movement, but a different kind of critical thinking and analysis. I hope that was clear with baby kind of screaming, but thank you, and it's really good to be here.
Hi, this is Dave Ragland. I can jump in. Such a pleasure to be here, and my people are the ancestors who were sharecroppers, and in Tennessee, um, who and the folks in St. Louis, the Ferguson movement are my people. The people in doing restorative justice work in circles are my people. Um, and I'm here supported by my ancestors. I'm going to call in Goldie Davis, and I'm on Ramapola Napi land. And, you know, I think that I just wanted to say a little bit, but I think Jody answered a lot of what I'm thinking about. And it's really definitely about time. But it also, for me, it depends on how people are coming to the spaces, the movement spaces. Um, and if they are, you know, my experience as working in this area is, you know, one as an academic initially, and then an activist, um, working working around police violence, restorative justice, truth and reconciliation areas. And so definitely, how are people coming to the movements? Are they coming as experts who think that they know better than the people in the movements? Are they listening, being quiet, and supporting the people who are doing the work? And when I was teaching intro courses to peace and conflict studies, um, I did something similar. I asked people if, you know, like, where is violence? And people will point everywhere else. And I said, look out the window. This is empire. This is what it looks like. The solitude or peace that you experience comes at a cost of other people all around the country, all around the world. Um, and so, what does reparations look like in this moment? Are you coming saying what impacted communities are demanding? Are you coming talking about what you want and what feels nice, what lays nicely on your ears? I think reparations is a peace treaty, or an offer for a peace treaty.
Really good. The next question, and somebody can answer the first one, but the next one I want to kind of look at is what can peace building change? How can peace building change this moment? And the other side is, how can this moment change peace building? So either of those questions, how can peace building change this moment, and how this moment can change peace building
I'll
as a
speak
field?
on that. When I entered this field in the early 1990s, it was definitely an anti-racist field. My mentor, James Lowy, had worked with Martin Luther King, and we always saw what we called conflict resolution, which we now call peace building, as definitely being relevant here in the United States, which, is a conflict affected country, which is what we call those far off nations abroad. And I think that somewhere along the line, the evolution of our field diverged and it became so focused on the international. And I would say the field has almost split now to where there's
who wanted to join the Zoom session, you can click.
Somebody's talking. Okay, sorry. So yeah, I would say there's a spectrum of peace building, a social justice peace building, which really looks at white supremacy and colonialism and these historic injustices and the structural manifestations of those today. And on the other end of the spectrum, really kind of a law and order stability peace building, which has kind of been blended with military operations and peacekeeping operations. And, it's not as if peace building is one or the other, but I think most of us fall somewhere on the spectrum. And so my people are those who are really trying to bring about the social justice. And as a white woman, I'm constantly learning, how can I be a better ally? How can I show up? How can I listen? And how can I just keep learning and challenging myself to being more authentic in every moment of my life, to not just the skills of peace building, which are the active listening, the problem solving, all that stuff that I teach, but also the social justice values, which really we have to look at power in every instance of our life. How am I using my power? What is my privilege? How do I question that? How do I use it to give voice to others? That's all.
That's really good. I'm wondering, just even a follow-up, like something that I think about is what role so if we do like an oppression analysis, and we see like who is receiving the most oppression and who's given the most oppression, right? Or if we do a violence analysis, I always wonder, what role do non-racialized peace builders, what role do non-genderized, so people that are on the spectrum of often, that look like the people that often give oppression, like what role do we play in this kind of shift, if any, or where should be our stance, right?
I'd like to jump in. Is that all right, Monica? I can't tell if somebody else was. Yeah, I'm John Paul Lederach, and I'm a recovering academic, I guess you would call it. My family right now, my people, we're trying to create a little 6 to 8 week family bubble. So my grandson at 1.5 and my kids have arrived. We've quarantined for a couple of weeks. We got 2 cats, 2 dogs and a cat, and none of us have been together for a while. So it's like chaos city. It feels like most of the places that I work in the world right now, which is very much at home and great. I want to build from, I'm going to pull an old word from a Nicaraguan revolutionary, Tomas Borges, that I heard. He titled this in a book, although I heard him talk about it more directly at one point. He used the phrase impatient patience. And I think that's kind of a descriptor of where I've been working at for a long time. I want to go back to what David said, and Jody. I think 2 things that jumped out at me. The first was the notion of reparations as a peace treaty. This this ability to not outsource responsibility for history to somebody else, but to face ourselves and to face that with the care that we bring to the harm that has been done, that many of us have benefited from and others have continued to suffer from, remains absolutely at the front. And one of the things that, if anything, that I've learned over the years, it's that there is no such thing as a reckoning, as if it's an event or a noun. I think it's a continuous process that's unfolding, and it has layers that we aren't always conscious of. And we need that capacity to really reckon. I know that much of what I worked on in the early part of the 80s was understanding better how the colonial endeavor had infiltrated the peace building world, and that it's never quite disappeared. I think that's a lot of what my Latin American experience certainly brought very much to the fore from people like Paulo Freire or Gustavo Gutierrez, depending on the field of inquiry you might have been in. And one of the things that comes with that is that it is both personal and universal. And I think that one of the things that peace building has struggled with is that because we're on the good path, we don't always want to reckon with how we participate in stuff. And I'm finding that even at 65, it's still an ongoing, deep process of recognizing where it comes from, how it has been a part of our lives, and the ways that it, it moves. And I think at this particular moment, to go to your earlier question, Monica, which I thought was a great one, I think one of the biggest things that's happening right now is that the gift of this year in some ways is the gift that apathy is not an option as much as it used to be. Now, the problem is that some people got really upset about, quite a variety of things. So we got a lot of energy going right now. But I think what we're seeing is that there's a big shift with people ready and willing to not let apathy be the mode of the day, because it's just not possible anymore. And I think that's actually a real gift. The question is how we move in ways together that helps to transform that toward a much more wider cast systemic change, as opposed to sort of the shorter stuff that's often been worked with.
So is apathy enough? So I always say, like, empathy is the fuel to our destination. It's not the destination. Like, I really, frankly, I don't care if you have empathy or not. For me, like, we're trying to reach to, the promised land. And I hope we get there with empathy, but that's like the way, that's the car, that's the vehicle that we get there. But we have like collective liberation. We have peace for all that don't have peace inside and out. Like, that's my goal. And so I'm wondering, like, is empathy or non-apathy enough for y'all? How do we move it, right? So I guess, how do we move it from the emergent to the urgent? I mean, I guess that is the point.
Can I chime in? Abdul Salam, my people is my family and friends, and also the friends that's been murdered in these streets of Washington, D.C. I come from a place, I want to build this world from a place of necessity. I see a lot of different people from different way of lives on here, and I just happened to click on this link and I'm here. And it's for, this had to be, Allah's will. So I'm here, and I want to say to the people that y'all are doing good work.
To anyone who just entered the Visible room with the Zoom link, once you click on that link, you can close out of this tab and go to the workshop.
You're muted. Maybe you want to mute the Visible, because we want to hear you.
Y'all are doing good work, but good is no longer enough for us. We're on ground zero. We need you guys to be amazing. We can't reach or see or hear where all of these master plans are being made, because it never comes into the community that needs them. That's like coming up with the cure to COVID and not giving it to the people. I'm not here to insult or do any of that to anyone, because you guys, man, with your minds and your brains and everything that you're putting together can actually work. Because I've sat in places. I work for a nonprofit now. I actually started my nonprofit before I went away to prison, and I guess the work that I was doing was doing a little too much, and it was contradicting what the FBI wanted to do. But that's another story. But I wanted to say that if these master plans that you guys come up with never makes it down to the people, what use is it? And we sit on here and we sign our papers, our telelog saying that we sat on Zooms for, 2 hours and nothing happens, I don't mind being treated as a lab rat. And I think I speak for all the lab rats, as long as you using what you learn from me to better the people, man, that need to be better. So I just wanted to say that we can't hear you guys from way up there. We can't see the work that you guys doing from way up there. Bring it down to the level where it's needed at, man, and let's see what happens then. And we can only learn from the mistakes we make. So, I know people that I read books about people that failed their way all the way to the top. But we have to start somewhere, man. And I'm here for you guys, man. I'm right here. I'm on ground zero. I work for a nonprofit. I'm certified with the restorative justice piece, the circles. So I'm ready. I sleep with my fist in the air. So I'm ready.
Well, how do we do that? I mean, how should, how does, I wanted even Thor from, he worked a lot of indigenous communities, in Latin America. And I think that was the main, his main kind of point to this life is, that's great ideas. I'm sorry, nobody feels it on the ground. Great processes, great peace building, great everything. We're not feeling it. And Jody, in our conversation, you said similar, where like this pandemic is what a moment. But if like people are dying, I mean, you can't build peace. If people are hungry, you can't build peace. So I'm going to ask a question that I think kind of captures what Abdus is saying and what Jody was saying. And it's saying, how do we move from the emergent to the urgent while staying true to the unique movement contributions that peace building can bring? Right? How do we not become humanitarians, or how do we not become organized? Maybe we do become that, right? Or do we have something, a contribution or not? Like, what is that process?
Don't let the government fund you.
What?
Yes, ma'am. Yeah. They actually change the agenda. They once you get funding from the government, I've done it with my nonprofit before I went away. Once they get in, they control your whole program and say, don't do this, but do this, don't do this. We need private funding.
All the funders on here heard that? Okay.
Yeah.
Lisa, we'll stack you. Lisa, Carrie, and then Jody is managing a lot of stuff. So whenever you want to talk, Jody, you just tell us.
With you, I'm with him.
Thor, if you go ahead next, if you want to say something.
No, I was just, I mean, I totally agree with what Abdul said, because I've seen it many places how plans and designs and interventions are, as we say in Mexico, planeadas desde el escritorio, or made behind a desk. And that's like a complaint a lot of people I work with, they share with me. It's like, okay, people think about these programs, they want to have these like effects, these impacts, but they never get their feet dirty, and they never come down, they never see what's going on in the field. They just like plan sort of in the air, and they have a lot of knowledge. Yes, they have a lot of reading and maybe even experience, but in the end, if we don't include local people, direct impacted people who have been living within the problem, the issue, the conflict, whatever that is, in planning a solution in such a way that they are the leaders. They don't expect anyone from the outside to solve their problems. As a friend of mine used to tell me, he's an indigenous man, very smart. I don't know, he's just like an exemplary guy. And he used to tell me, well, you come and go and we stay. So we're gonna do it our own way, because you just come and go and it's fine. You can come, you can be of any service to the community, you can be supportive, you can we need you in some moments, but then it's like we have to take it on our own hands. And I think that's part of the way we should do peace building. I know it's complicated. I know there's so many things. There's so many things to consider, to factor in. But I think from my experience, treating people, as equals, and then acknowledging your own privilege and what you're doing in the city, then it's just that's the way people like to be, that's what the way I like to be treated, like equal, like a person, not like a kid, or like, I don't know better of my life. I don't know, what do I want? I do know what I want. It's complicated, but I do know what I want. I know how it is to live in certain circumstances. So it's just like bringing people to the center and losing some power, because we have power when we come from the outside, and we also have to acknowledge that, whether we are white or not.
Can anyone chime in with comment, or do we have to?
We can invite, let's
Sure.
we're gonna stack right now. David, do you want to say something? Lisa also? Yeah,
sure.
we'll do Lisa, David, Lisa, Carrie, and then Kieran and Monica. Okay, we'll stack you all.
Thank you.
I just want to, reinforce what was just said. I really appreciate that. And I also want to add, there's a well-known article that begins with decolonization is not a metaphor. And what we're talking about, what Eve Tuck and her co-author was talking about, was that, we often talk about, the building of peace and the getting communities what they need. But we talk about it from this perspective of what white folks can bring in and do. And, from my view, as somebody who kind of was in academia and then like working in my own home community, is that it's always people doing stuff in their communities to deal with the issue. The question is, are you willing to hang out and be supportive enough, long enough, to find out who's doing it and follow them instead of imposing some, project on people? And so I really think that's really urgent for peace building. And why does it need to scale up? The emergent speaks to the local, and the local, if we're using a metaphor of, say, mycelium, which is fungi, the way trees are interconnected under the forest floor, communities are connected with each other. People know, and there's all of this knowledge there, not to be used and harvested for the I think the militaristic kind of or state crafting realm of peace building, but for people who want peace that really means autonomy in their communities, and not control, and continued occupation like we're seeing in communities around the country. And there's more to be said about this, but I'd love to hear from more of the folks on the panel.
Let's have Lisa, and then we'll have Carrie. Wait, was it? Yeah, Lisa, Carrie, Kieran, and Monica. And I appreciate people writing me. We'll try to stack you, but I do want to, I don't know, how do the panelists feel? Should we just open up the floodgates? I feel like.
Yeah, I mean, I think why not?
Okay, this is sparking a lot. So if people are cool, if the panelists are cool with that, I do appreciate the time and energy it took to, prepare for this. But I also think this is all of our, it's going to take all of us to do something about it. So Lisa, go on.
Thanks so much, David, and everyone who's spoken. I think we have to think about the origins of this field too, because, back in the 1970s and 80s in the Philippines, the first people calling themselves peace builders were directly coming from people power movements, social movements that were volunteer basis. There was no money in peace building back then. And it was only because of South Africa's anti-apartheid movements and many of the movements growing up from the ground years ago that we created this field of peace building that became this academic discipline. And then people have graduate degrees, and then they have to get jobs in their focus, so they apply for project money. And that's definitely what happened in my life, is that, okay, now I'm a peacemaker. How am I going to support myself? But I really think we have missed something as a field, because instead of letting people power movements like the Black Lives Matter movement lead us, we tried to get out in front somehow, or try to start these things, and we weren't the ones to do that. And you can't start things, they have to grow from the ground up. That's one of John Paul's books with that title. So I think really kind of reconceptualizing peace building as social justice focused and following where the people are moving, how the movement has to be the generator of the energy and the leadership of what we're doing.
Hey, Carrie, can Jody go? She might have a quiet moment right now with her.
Yeah, sure.
I'm here, but I just turned the television on as a distraction, being honest, parenting during this time. Yeah, I think there are many things that is coming to mind. I agree with a lot of what folks have already shared. And I think also sometimes, depending on how you get trained as a peace builder, right, you kind of might do your work before you even get into the community to even create space to listen to the voice of the community. So also not being married to your solutions and your outcomes as a peace builder, right? Because then what happens is you go into that community, folks say, that doesn't work for me, and people can't hold that, right? So I think it's really about centering community, and that means listening to community voice. Yeah, I know. And sometimes recognizing that might not be the same as what you perceive the community to be, right? Because a lot of those solutions oftentimes are grounded within bias and also grounded within a deficit, right? I have the skills, I have the tools, I have the practices, and I'm coming and I'm giving it to you, right? But it is about how do you make an offering, and folks can choose whether or not they want to take up that offering, but recognizing the kind of lived experiences as knowledge and power. And I think about, for me, and all the intersections of my identity, but clearly a Black woman, immigrant woman also walking through this country. When I entered into the classroom, my lived experiences informed the work in the classroom. The work that I was learning in the classroom didn't inform my lived experiences, right? So I could already articulate at the age of 7, 8, what kind of racialized oppression looked like, even if I wasn't using terms from like Pedagogy of the Oppressed and these other incredible authors, right? But I knew what it was because my lived experience was both a metaphor and a reality of those circumstances. And so I think it's about, Jane Doherty at Eastern Mennonite always talks about, don't be married to your theories. And I find that a lot of folks, whether you're a peace builder or not, right? Because you want the outcomes to come fast, you want the solutions fast, but often they're not sustainable, right? It is hard to sit and listen and really be engaged in a process that is not always fast, right? So when I talk about urgency, it often prioritizes solutions over relationships, right? How do we enter into communities that we are not a part of, building relationships, really getting to the core of understanding who the kind of historians in that community are, who the young people in that community are, and really talking with people. And I'm echoing also some of the comments, really being with folks, like being in space with folks, right? And I think that leads to a lot of kind of practices that are sustainable. And when I think about what peace builders can do, like peace builders have a lot of resources. People have a lot of resources and connections. And even if it's just a name, because people play the name game, in some ways networking can be extractive, right? Like how do we also kind of lend and offer a lot of those resources, right? And recognize like what it means to be an expert. It depends on whose perspective that is, but even your expertise is always growing. There's always something else to know and learn. This is Cielo, everyone. Would you like to say hi? You can take it out your hand and wave.
Thank you, Jody. Beautiful. We're trying to get the graphic up. Yeah, I think this is what's powerful about this is that like the question of who gets the chance to design, who gets a chance to speak into it, to name it. Apollo Freire said, the people who have the chance to name the problem have the chance to change the problem. And so many of our problems are named in DC, are named by white folks, for people of color, are not named by the people. We have a space, I'm just gonna do a quick promote, but we kind of killed it a little bit, we're reviving it, called the Hive. And we really use that space to think about a lot of things around these things. We're going to start it again in January. And so just so you don't think this is the last time you could ever talk about this, so you want to talk right now, on this forum, we're hoping to bring a lot of the same people into that space, and that's what it was. And so it's really a co-creation space between human rights activists, peace builders, creatives, artists, to really think of how do we move into that. So I'll put the link here. We haven't yet moved it into the Plus Peace platform, but you are welcome to join that too. So don't get too stressed out that it's the last time you're going to be able to speak to this. But let's go to Carrie and then Kieran and then Monica, and then we're going to stick with the panelists. So if that's okay with y'all until the end. Okay, Carrie.
Yeah. This has been really so many, there's a really rich dialogue. And I think we at AFSC, I've been in this unique space of working primarily on our peace building programs that happen overseas. And we have a large social justice organization community that happens in the United States. And often those two groups are at odds. And think that one group prioritizes diplomacy and incremental change. The other group isn't prioritizing dialogue. And this is a tension that's existed for 50 years. I went back to go look at our archives and found this letter from Martin Luther King, who we had organized a speaking tour for him, and wrote a letter. The chief diplomat who had organized it had wrote a letter saying, Martin Luther King wanted to just take pictures and talk to people. And the chief diplomat said, you wouldn't go to any meetings. It's this tension between how do you, what strategies do you use to build peace? Is it engagement in community? Is it talking? Is it activism? And I think we have to create space for all of us together, that it will only work if we're doing it together. I also think as an organization that funds local, some programs in countries that are conflict affected, we have to give more space, all the donors on the line. I think we have to stop prioritizing the projects, the objectives. We need to give general operating support. The professionalism of peace building has created this environment where there's no room for creativity. Literally, there's no breathing space for peace building to grow. Our teams are so overscheduled that you have to get on their calendar 6 weeks out. Where's the space for relationship building if that's the way that we're organized? And I also think we have to be more willing to put our bodies on the line. It's, we can't stay in this intellectual space. There's a real resistance from our community to join with this, to merge with the social justice movement space. And I think that's to our detriment and to the detriment of peace building globally. So anyway, this is sparking lots of ideas for me. I'll stop there for now.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll go to Kieran, and sorry, everybody, we're going to just get the panelists after Kieran and Monica. I did open it up a little bit, but we want to just hear from them for the last kind of questions, and then we'll come back in about 20 minutes to questions. Yeah, Kieran.
Thank you so much, Monica. And yeah, I really appreciate being here. And to give you a quick background, my name's Kieran Singh, and I'm here in East Tennessee, which is traditionally the land of the Cherokee Nation. But I oversee the work of the International Storytelling Center. And we do a lot of work with storytelling and narrative, and with Alliance for Peace Building and other peace building partners. And one thing to go back to that question, I'm building on what Abdas talked about in terms of power, and what Jody really sort of alluded to as well. And I think, and it's about this power and how, going back to the emergent to the urgent. And it's something that I was really sort of considered that the moment that we're right in, it's the idea that storytelling is a process, not just a product. It's also a liminal experience. There's a transformational act that takes place between the teller and the listener. And we are in this moment right now. If you imagine the pandemic as a front porch, and pre-pandemic was when you're inside. We're walking through the front porch, we're emerging to the outside. We're neither inside nor outside, and we're both. And that's what the pandemic is. It's the front porch, the liminal space. And in a liminal space is when the greatest storytelling experiences can happen, because all the emotions come to the surface. And it's an opportunity to shape that and discover. And when it goes back to the idea of power, so when we think about the emergent to the urgent, we also remember that it's the most democratic art form, in the sense that it can equalize that power structure, whether it's the money coming from the government or who it might, that it amplifies those voices and brings the individuals that may be on the margins of the spectrum to the center. So amplifying voices rather than just giving voice. So it's like offering in this space that to really think about the work and this opportunity that we might have right now to shape a story that we have the potential to create in collaborations with the communities and ensure that no matter what the power structures are, storytelling is at the heart of a democratic process because it belongs to everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Monica?
Yeah, I apologize. I thought it was a workshop format, but I'm just going to throw this out super fast, which is that I think if we were to start to move from our cognitive solution building and look at embodied solution building, that might start to move us more into a place of action. It is much easier to establish attunement across bodies and nervous systems than it is to establish agreement from belief systems. And I just find that when we're always at that kind of higher level of cognitive solution building, we're missing out on what is possible if we were to come from more settled, if we were to actually start to settle nervous systems across all sectors, if we were to start to build from our neurology rather than from our cognitive spaces, I think that we start to have a whole different way of approaching the many problems that we're talking about. And we have to remember that all of them cause trauma. We're all living with racialized trauma. We're all living with, the traumas that have been brought upon our communities based on the many inequities that we talk about. And so if we're never acknowledging or moving, if we're never acknowledging the trauma and moving out of the trauma into more settled bodies and coming from there to our solution building, it's very hard to take action. I'll leave it there.
I do appreciate that. I don't know if any panelist has any pushback as far as how trauma impacts different, right? So there's also power to different traumas or collective, you could have complex trauma, right? You could have collective trauma, historical trauma, experiential trauma, and, complex trauma, and others, maybe are seeing it secondhand. And so I wonder, I think that's the idea of embodied is really, embodied, artistic, I think one thing peacebuilders talk a lot about it, but we don't center it, and we don't put that at a place where it's valuable and important, and even sacrifice for it. So from the emergent to the urgent, I mean, basically the idea also is, maybe the way we've been doing things is not working. Maybe, I don't know, I'm going to throw it out there. So maybe we need more art, maybe we need more embodied, less oral, less of the written word is God, right? Where that's basically what it is in peace building and in many academic or research-based fields, because that is maybe the core also, where storytelling is a nice idea, but unless you wrote it in a book, it's kind of not really important to anybody. And I've seen this many times where a person of color will tell their experience, and some, a non-racialized person will say, oh, where can I read about that? And I'm like, the person just told you right now about it. Literally came out of there. They told you don't need to read more about it. Do you believe them? So what I'm wondering is this idea of metaphors. So we thought of, I've been working, playing this idea with the Wadi. John Paul is also a king of metaphors with the critical East. What other metaphors, right? If this analytical, log frame to, solution-based to peace building ain't working, and it's not working for the people that are, as we said, that are taking in a lot of this violence or oppression. It's working for some people, that's for sure. And so what are some metaphors that we can, in the participants are free to write it in the chat. What are some metaphors we can start working with that help us move from the emergent to the urgent?
Can I add something?
Yeah.
This isn't answering that question, so I'll just lay
It's
that
fine.
out there.
No problem.
I think two things. One, appreciating Timothy in the comments, just talking about the kind of spectrum, and we talked about this a little bit, Monica, when we checked in, the spectrum moving between kind of urgent and emergent, that it's never just one or the other, but there's movement in between. And I think we might have to create space to talk about what does that look like and what is that, right? What is this kind of in-between space, and who is in that space? And how do we bring others that seem like they're often far away from each other into that space as well? And then the other piece is, I think, how we kind of, when I think about the embodied piece, thank you, Monica Day, for that. I think, how do we kind of hold space? So for me, for example, as a restorative justice practitioner here in Oakland, California, there is no space I'm a part of where there isn't ceremony and ritual, right? Like real, and there's a way over time, even for example, with land acknowledgements, that in some ways over time, it becomes like symbolism, especially where we are right now, without talking about the continued occupation of lands. So always taking that a step further. And so when I'm in space, we're always doing ceremony. And it also makes sense, like I'm in Oakland, California, right? Like it looks different from some other places where I've done work in like Harrisonburg, Virginia, right? Depending on which side of town you're on, but that's another story for another day. And so I think I'm always in space where we're dropping into the body and we're doing ceremony and we're calling ancestors in and we're honoring the land and we're honoring people. And so I think in all of kind of my practice, that's something that I continue to see that is very much balanced with shifting things in our local community. So I'm able to see us really drop into the body and also talk about the violence that communities continue to face here in Oakland, as well as here in the Bay Area. So I see those things always happening. I even think about our young people meeting with Board of Supervisors members and having them do an icebreaker, and folks in suits are like, I'm not gonna do it. And our youth are like, actually, everyone's going to do it, right? Like even entering into that kind of space and to be unapologetic in one's being, to say like, you know, if you wanna understand our communities and you wanna work with our communities and you want our communities to support you, like you're going to do this thing. So even in those spaces, I see like dropping into the body, once again being present. And I also talked about this value of radical hospitality, that folks show up in space, like for us, you know, making sure you're having food, like where did someone sleep last night, where they're going to sleep tonight, like those things that I think it's very much easy to forget about. And even for organizations that are underfunded, like working with community organizations and local business that can provide you with food and that can provide you with resources, I think those things are really critically important, right? Because this, and I'm in between this space of like peace building and organizing culture, which is why it sounds like this, because sometimes you muted it, you have to figure it out. It's okay, you got it. Take a deep breath. So even, I think sometimes even in peace building, like not seeing organizers as the other, but seeing where is the kind of middle space between organizing and this thing that we see as peace building, and beginning to ask some of those questions, just like, how are you doing? So I think once again, kind of not prioritizing agenda over relationships, but meeting people's needs, even the people that come to the table, and not supporting a kind of burnout culture that says you have so much fire, but I watch your fire burn, because there is no space for celebration. There's no space for kind of embodied movement. Like the urgency around solution is glorified at the expense. And I think this is something that David named, at the expense of like people's real bodies and their livelihoods. Like we have organizers that are dying in some ways, not because what's happening on the streets and the violence that's happening to us, although it's a culmination of that, but because we are sacrificing certain people for the sake of whatever the movement is, like in organizing, I think, as well as in peace building, because once again, I kind of work within that middle ground. A lot more I can say, but I'm going to end there and kind of pass it over to others in the panel.
David, you've been quite a while, and she called you in, so. Unmute. Anybody?
Okay. All right. Sorry. No, I'm glad you called me in. I was really thinking about those comments, and the notion of like what's embodied, and I want to just continue along that same strand and talk about a little bit the impact of colonization, not just on people who've been colonized, but on colonizers. To colonize someone else, according to Foucault, required that white people be colonized. And he writes about it, in case you want an academic reference, in Society Must Be Defended. And then Res Momenticum further talks about that from a clinical psychological perspective of white folks who, and we just had Thanksgiving, like a complete fabrication about what happened, or about that history. So like this traumatization, like people who had been colonized by the feudal power, right? And or in terms of having few loyalty to the state, or to the state system. And so if we're talking about peacemakers who are essentially like living out like this Western perspective, in um, organizing and doing the work of peace building, who are essentially like living out trauma, who are reinforcing trauma on people who've already, been their lands conquered, through these wars of colonization. And I really believe that maybe we don't need a metaphor, but as Jody pointed out, we need to do the action of reconnecting and healing trauma in order to do no more harm in our work. Um, and so that leads me to like this kind of double-edged duty, that peace builders who are non-BIPOC, or people who haven't fully accepted this system, or the sanctity of the system, to be working on how to make repair, and healing that trauma that they reinforce in this systematized application of, what peace building is, abroad and locally and internationally. And especially in this moment when what I've kind of witnessed is a lot of people jumping from the international work to the local work because they see the money, particularly under this administration, are more likely to go to, rather than international vehicles like TRCs, in the State Department, they'll go to, say, policing in the US. And if there's money to be made with community police relations, there's that same kind of like colonized, or recolonization, that's happening with the police for some communities. And peace builders are buying into like that kind of organizing and working, which continues to re-traumatize them and our communities. So how do you heal yourself and make repair? And I think what Jody suggests is like that, like reconnecting with one's ancestors, reconnecting, and not like skipping over to like your Irish ancestors who had these indigenous practices, but dealing with the slaveholders in between, dealing with the people who benefited from slavery, and dealing with yourself, like looking at that epistemic injustice, like, or injustice on the surface that allows white bodies to benefit from slavery in the world that it created, while going abroad saying, hey, I'm making peace, or I'm coming to help you with something. And that, I really think the world has to say that peace building isn't welcome anymore, unless you fix your own shit.
What role, David, and others can answer, what role, I think in the emergent, that's where all the stories come, right? The ancestors, the sins of our people, generations of sins, generational sins. What role does mourning have in moving? Like, when do we mourn? Who do we mourn? Like, who's allowed to mourn? How long should we mourn, right? I mean, I know that's different for everybody, but right, I feel like what another thing of white supremacy want to move to action, right? Like even this whole title, right? It's not like from emergent to mourning, right? It's from emergent to urgent, right? Like, let's get to work. It's time to go. We've been sleeping too long. And this like production, I always say, like, I'm 100% human. I'm not a machine. Like, there's no part of me that's a machine. And I have to remind myself of that because, after working long hours and, still there's no peace. So, we have to remember that we're human. But at what point are we responsible to mourning and to holding space for that, or for other people to mourn, right? To shutting up and sitting down and really holding that space.
Can I say something? Maybe not about morning, sorry, morning. But before, like, you're analyzing how we move from the emergent to the urgent, I think we should ask the emergent for who and the urgent for who. Like, what is urgent for who? Is it urgent for me? Is it urgent for the U.S. Department of Foreign Affairs? Is it urgent for the people living in the problem? What is urgent? What is emergent? Oh, and as Jody said, doesn't have to be one or the other. But as David was saying, and coming, I have like 60% European blood, 30% indigenous blood, and 10% West African blood, more or less. So, like when like your side in history, like, okay, I came, I'm a descendant of slaves. Okay, I'm a descendant of Native Americans or slave traders. It might be easier to, locate yourself and start like healing. But when you are like this kind of mixture, then you feel you are like lost somewhere. So it's also very important for people like me with this kind of imposed ancestry, because the slaves in Mexico didn't want to come. Indigenous people didn't want to be colonized. Only maybe the Europeans wanted to take over the land and the gold and everything else. So, it's also very important to analyze your history and see what came out of that mixture. If it's more white, if it's more black, if it's more brown, whatever it is, and just like work on that so when you go out and try to help and try to save the world, you have to, I mean, people save themselves. They've been saving themselves for hundreds, thousands of years. So I go back to the emergent and urgent. What is really emergent and urgent? So for some people might be, I need the demarcation of my territory. So for some people might be, I need recognition of my land. For some people might be, we need restorative justice and restoration and many other things. So just who has the right to what, to mourn or to do other things, I'm not sure.
Yeah. Thanks, Thor. Yeah. If somebody want to respond to any of that from the panel, and then we'll move into questions. We already have one, and so if you have a question, please write it into the chat so we could just have some equity in space. Do you want to speak to any of those questions, or do you want me to read a question? What shall we do?
So maybe just a quick, no, I really appreciate this. I think there's a paradoxical quality which can sometimes feel paralyzing. So I, for example, personally really benefited from some of the work of Lama Rod Owens, who comes at this obviously from a particular perspective in reference to his practices. But what grabbed me in the midst of this, from reading and in conversation with him, was the challenge and the need to sit with, as an older white male, to sit with my own brokenness. And this is, so the urgent doesn't mean dashing in to fix somebody or some place. And that's what I think the big message is. That's been the default button of too much of peace building, on the premise that those coming to fix not only have something to offer, but that they are in a superior position to know how to even name it and to fund it. And this other avenue requires something that most of us don't want to do, which is to stop and sit with, I take David's words straight up, sit with your shit, sit with mine. It's not easy. It's not easy to see what it is that has been there, even while the world continues on around you and you feel the pull to respond and do something, there is this paradoxical component that I think we find most significantly in the words decenter and dismantle. And that's not just about some abstracted system that's out there. It's about also the personal work. That's been the part that I found that 2020 came home. And I think it's the long part. When I say that reckoning is not a noun, it's a verb. It's about the ongoing work that many of us that have been beneficiaries and have had more of our words land in books need to be doing in a much deeper and more systematic way, but with the commitment to stay in conversation, but to take the word seriously. The pause is you got to take a hard look at it, and that's what I've found has been really challenging, because I think most of us got into this work because we think we want to do good in the world, and it's hard to look at yourself and realize that some parts of this have either disattended, not noticed, disattended to, or have actually contributed to harm, because we don't like being on the other side of do no harm. We don't like to be perceived that way, but that's the hard work. And I think his phrase was what caught me. It really sent me, and it's been, I think it'll go for a long time to come. It's going to be a radical uncertainty that will stay with me. Radical in that I have to find ways to stay rooted, but uncertainty in that I'm not 100% certain what this means. And it's going to require sitting with my own brokenness. That's what I have found.
Yeah, thank you. So we have quite a few questions, and I don't know if I'm going to hit them all, but maybe one that we can kind of talk in this context is, at what point does our intro work start and our, internal work? And at what point can we, when do we get our healing? How do we know, right? Like how in the transitional scope and maybe even the US kind of context, when are we able to kind of know what we need to do when? If it's internal work or external work or intergroup work. Because right now in the polarized state, I think that's really complicated and it's like walking on landmines either way. And another way to put it is, like when is it our ministry to reach our own people? Anybody have thoughts?
Monica, can I share something? This is Raju with Global Mediation Team, and my people are the people of India, Pakistan, Kashmir. I've been away from the homeland for 55 years, and living in the West, I felt that I was outside of the situation. I could think outside the box. And so I think what Thor was talking about, examining where you come from, what percentage, what nationality you are, but also where your heart lies. Even though I've been brought up in the West and I was born in England, I still have a deep commitment to healing the issues of Kashmir and India and Pakistan. So I think when there's a calling there, then you have to respond. When there is an urge, like you say, that is when the impetus is there and the urge is there to move. And also I want to echo on what Abdus was saying earlier. Brother Abdus was saying about peace reaching the streets. That's so important because when I'm working with Kashmir on the ground, I'm working with a university there and a professor there, and he told me that they never experienced anything different on the United Nations Day of Peace. Of course, we had our celebrations over here in America, and we had a lot of activities, but the conflict zones don't really experience what it means to have an International Day of Peace. So that kind of gives us a little perspective, and I'm grateful you allowed me to share.
Thank you. Yeah, that's Jody, one of the goals of Plus Peace is really to lift up International Day of Peace and do actions around that and really use it as a day of nonviolence also. But Jody, yeah.
Yeah, I have this value of radical honesty. So speaking what I like, my truth. So I think in the two things in the peace building world, there's this language around like what we see as conflict or armed conflict and continuous conflict. And it's often about like over there and the representation of guns, and Black and brown and poor and queer communities in this country continue to face armed violence on a daily basis through poverty, through food deserts, through police terrorism. Like this is ongoing trauma that is the history and the foundation of this country. And so even this separation between what we see as conflict, I think informs people feeling the need to act, respond, and support the efforts, honestly, of many organizers in this country. And I think David and other folks spoke to this, like in this moment, everyone's coming up to support Black Lives Matter and many other intersecting movements. Even the language that folks are using is shifting, and it also is making invisible the Black and queer and femme organizers that did the groundwork and laid the foundation and sacrificed their bodies. And I think that's important to name. And it is the same thing even in those places that we identify as over there, right? It kind of makes invisible the local knowledge and folks who have sustained their communities, right? And so I'm also thinking about like, how do we not, even in an effort to support, how do we not make other folks invisible who have even who have even knocked down the door so that we could even show up in the community in the first place? And so I think I just want to be able to really name that, because I think that framing impacts our ability to even serve, I think our ability to even tell the truth about this nation and its history, but also what currently continues to happen. And it continues, I think, even around, I think speaking to something that John Paul mentioned, just even, I think around like the when we have this certain language of like urgent, and then we go in and then it's all on the news and then we write articles about it and everyone forgets about it. There are communities that still don't have clean water. There are people who continue to still experience homelessness, right? Like there is an abundance of things that is all connected to the foundation of this country. Like armed conflict is this country, is this nation. And I think I just feel that like my spirit is just feeling the need to acknowledge that, especially like as a Black woman who engages with this every day, not just to serve in a way that I feel like spiritually I'm called to serve, but for my own freedom and liberation and the world that I want to create for this young child that I've birthed into this world. And so I just think it's important, like, and I know it's hard not to talk in kind of dichotomies and separations, because white supremacy teaches you that it's either this or that, or it's either good or evil. And so even for me, kind of pulling back the layers of my own thinking. And then the last piece to answer this question of mourning, it never stops. Like there are ceremonies and rituals and practices that teach us to mourn, that in this country says that you can't take 30 days off to mourn because it's inappropriate, or you can't take a day off even, right? And so I think it's about continuing to hold rituals that teach us to mourn and to release and to honor, because a part of mourning is also the honoring. It's not just the letting go and ignoring and making things visible, but it is the honoring. And so how do we also, I think, even in movement space, right, make mourning a part of that? Like I think about when I was an organizer and I was angry as hell and I always wanted to fight people when I was like, how do you not believe this is real? Like for me, it was what was underneath that anger of the mourning that wasn't about letting go that I think I was being taught, but the mourning that was about honoring, like continuing to honor the kind of liberation and freedom that is destined for me. So I'll go ahead and just end there. I just feel like I had to share that.
Beautiful. Thank you. And I wanted to say, I always say we're swimming in the ocean between the emergent and the urgent, and in really kind of in liminal space between maybe thresholds. And sometimes we're swimming with sharks too. So it's not easy. So we have about 7 minutes. So I just wanted to give, the different panelists kind of the last word, like, where do we go from here? What is maybe one value or one principle that we can carry into this, well, I would say into this next year? What's a gift you want to give to to the listeners here, that they can take, that you take with you as you do your work? Jody, you could talk even if you just talked. I see you're inspired. It doesn't matter.
I can jump in, and I get just from my own perspective, and from what I've learned from many folks on this call, and in my own organizing, is the importance of the truth telling and the specificity of the story, as it's connected to human dignity, and as an effort to, I think, decolonize our efforts. It's not a metaphor. Um, it means people will have to give up shit, including bad behavior and belief that they're right, or that their perspective is right, and that they deserve to be in the role that they're in. Um, so I think it is a drastically reimagining of oneself, and the positioning. And I think that's the sad part about white supremacy, is that it reinforced a kind of mediocrity that we can see all too well, even at the top of this nation's leadership right now. And I think it has to go beyond uh, um, just saying, "Oh, this person is black; they should be in this role." Like Kamala's a cop, and and we have to, I think, demand something different in this moment, like a set of values that does not prioritize violence and people who use violence. And I think we have to, the truth telling from the street is that the reason why we said fuck the police, and why we unapologetically say what we need to say when we want to say it, is because this system that we live in is an anti-truth system, even before Trump. That many people came to this country and are continuously experiencing the brunt of American empire. It's like thousands of 9/11s happening daily around the world and in communities around this country.
Yeah. I want to add on to this that, the whole purpose of racism from the start was to benefit economically the white privileged classes. And I think we have to remember that racism comes from these economic origins of sort of this free market capitalism, which I think goes unquestioned by many peace builders, that, of course, democracy, peace, justice, and free market capitalism all go together. And I think when we start opening up, what is the goal of peace building? Is it to end armed conflict or find a peace agreement? Or is it this broader goal of social justice? Again, I see these really, the spectrum of goals. If social justice, then we're looking at what Jody and David and others have talked about in terms of the discrepancies and the deaths from poverty, from COVID right now, that are being, it's an unequal death rate for different people of color in this country. And that's because of structural injustices. And it's not just about the armed conflict that we're trying to reduce. We're trying to end structural injustice. And so we have to look at our economic systems. And we also have to talk about the climate crisis, which is part of the economic system of exploitation of the planet, and really seeing the relationship between systemic racism and the climate crisis, because all of these are a web of oppressive relationships and exploitive relationships that have a lot to do with our economy. So I wanted to end with a comment about that, because I think it's all tied.
Yeah, I'll follow on that, Lisa. I think I'll leave this conversation with a sense of stillness and reflection. And I think looking at power So trying to understand how are we contributing in a way to create this world where my peace will not exist unless your peace exists. This idea of what we call shared security. How can we build a world where I am only secure if everyone on this call is secure, and vice versa? And how do we get that embedded into our governance structures, our peace building structures, so we can imagine a new world where we're not putting almost 3/4 of our budget towards military operations and expenses, but we're really putting money to invest in people and needs and communities. And we're reflecting on whose voice is heard, who's at the table, who's not at the table, whose story is not heard. So I'm leaving with some thinking to do on that, and it's been a great conversation. So thanks for inviting me to join it.
I don't know if we have time for one more. I'm not sure on our.
We'll hear from all of you. We'll make sure we actually are running this, so we hold the power.
Ah, okay, that's great. Power to the panel. So you asked earlier about metaphors. There's one that's been bopping around for me from a long-running conversation that I've had with a very good colleague and mentor of mine, Ricardo Esquivia, who's human rights lawyer and peace builder from the Caribbean region of Colombia. Works a lot with grassroots communities across one of the regions most affected by a lot of violence in Colombia. We started talking about this at the point at which those series of events kind of came to pass that were Brexit, voting against the Colombian peace agreement, and the election of Donald Trump. That all happened like in kind of a nucleus of, extraordinarily unexpected things that exploded in a lot of different ways. Ricardo had showed me this, so it's got a little bit of a story to it. I'm sorry, I have to go to a story to get to the point. There's a form of yucca, which is a root that they eat a lot in various parts of Latin America and even up here in North America. Yucca is like a rooted plant. It's delicious, fried, sort of a starch product. But there is a yucca plant that's poisonous. And it's in English, we call it the poisonous yucca. And if you eat it, you really get sick. And so in that part of Colombia, the indigenous people and the Afro-Colombian people invented this tool, which is kind of a basket made with very flexible fibers. It's elongated. It can be upwards to 5 and 6 feet long. And at each end, there's a loop, so that if you hang the loop from a rafter and you fill that basket with the poisonous yucca, and then at the bottom, you have another loop, you can put a stick in it and you can twist it. And as you twist it, it kind of pressurizes the material of the yucca. And what comes out is the poison. And what remains is worth eating. And Ricardo and I were talking a lot about the question. It's called a cebucan, if you ever want to look it up in Spanish. We were talking about the question, how do you get the poison out of these systems, and of the ways our relationships have been structured, and the ways sometimes our personal lives have been lived? And I think it's a powerful question. And I think it's one that we're struggling with a lot. So that metaphor of the cebucan, I'm not sure we can invent a peace building cebucan, but it's got something to do with finding the ways that you hold to what's good, but you find you are able to let the poison come out of the system. And that's one of our challenges.
Can I ask Thor to go first, and then Jody will finish with you? Thank you, John Paul.
Oh, I really like that metaphor, because I've seen how people do that, get the poison out of it. In Brazil, they call it mandioca, but it's the same thing. Well, I just I live this session just hoping that peace building stays true to its ethics and doesn't become like a sort of offset market. I mean, it doesn't become a market for offsetting like the wrongs that the global north did, you know, just as like the carbon offsetting market, and then it just becomes like a very capitalist process and programs that in the end, you know, it's all about like getting funding to do stuff, but not trying to end or bring peace or end conflict or transform conflict. So my hope is that peace building doesn't become that, because from what I said here, and like the idea of like peace builders coming to the local problems now that the money is here, I'm just like thinking about that, and I just hope that peace building doesn't become an guild offset market or something like that for powerful countries or developed countries.
That's good. Joe, do you want the last word?
Sure, this is great. It was really great to connect with you all. I'm always ready to work, so please, or serve, so please feel free to really reach out and connect. I also just want to highlight the Reparations Campaign and shout out to the work of David Ragland and a Truth Telling Project. I dropped both of those links in the description box. We are, I think, in what feels like a spiritual moment around reparations, and continuing to make sure that folks across the diaspora is leading that work. And this particular campaign is really about the embodied pieces of reparations, along with like the monetary and many other things. And so I really want to uplift that and many other things. So please feel free to reach out and connect. I also hold a network of about 158 individuals doing work at the intersection of truth-telling, racial healing, reparations, memorialization, and a bunch of other things, really thinking about a national truth commission for this country and supporting localized truth commissions. And so, yeah, and I think in the same way, what it is that you're working on, what coalitions do you want to build? How do we really be in intimate relationship with each other that also allows us to be in better service to the communities we live in and the communities we serve? That is my commitment. So please feel free to follow up and connect. There's healing work to be done, but you know, in many ways, I believe that it is destined. So thank you all, and it was really great to join and be here with you.
Yes. Thank you, everyone. Deep bow to our panelists and to all the participants, all the listeners. Active listening is also a very important skill, and empathetic speech. And thank you so much that we can hold a space. If folks want to write in their contact information, we'll let this kind of run. That there might be other people on the panel, maybe or on the in this room that you want to connect with. So feel free to drop it there. It's a good space, and we will share the visual. We will share the video. Everything shall be accessible. No worries, because I said we hold the power. So power to the panel. Really, thank you, David, John Paul. Thank you, Thor. Thank you, Jody. Thank you, Carrie and Lisa, for holding this space. Lots of wisdom and food for thought. Thank you all, and catch other sessions that are coming up on I call it Beelzebub, but you could call it Bizabo, I guess, on that platform. That gives me a headache. Bye all. Thank you. And we'll keep it running a little bit so that people can put any contact information or any kind of way they want to reach out. But thanks all.